Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
A great deal of uncertainty still surrounds the 2020 election. No matter what the vote count says, President Trump is just getting started with legal challenges and recounts. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin might all be open to challenge in one form or another. But other than validation of the reality that we're a deeply divided nation, we've learned a bunch of things already from this election, and here to help us understand the takeaways from this election is our old friend, LibertyNation.com columnist, political columnist Joe Schaeffer, who maintains that Trump has won the election, and he'll explain why. Welcome back, Joe.
Hello, Tim. Good to be here.
Well, always good to have you. Now, Joe, I rarely share personal messages with our audience, but I'm making an exception today because when we discussed you joining us on the show, you wrote back, Trump won. That is where my analysis will come from. This is massive voter fraud, and it's poorly done massive voter fraud. Go ahead and explain to us why.
And I think it's important to know it's not really surprising. It's just a continuation of what we've seen thrown against this man since 2015 when he went down that escalator. How many coups have been attempted against him by the establishment since he's been in the White House? This is just the latest. This is, to me, it's so similar to Russia impeachment, getting Lieutenant Colonel Vindman out there and all that stuff. Let's look at what happened. I mean, in-person voting, Trump's romping. He's winning the states that he needs to win. The Rust Belt states, he held on to all the Republican states he needed to have. Everything is going as expected. There's really no surprises. And then we get this massive ballot dump at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, wiping out huge Trump leads in these states that he has to win. And for them to just attribute it to mail-in voting, and that explains everything, that is the big deceit that I refuse to accept. I don't care what kind of voting you're doing. It is beyond normal unless you're in a Soviet country behind the Iron Curtain in the 1960s for one candidate to get 100% of the votes. They are trying to tell us, because of the coronavirus, that Democratic voters did the responsible thing, stayed at home and cast in their mail-in ballots. And that justifies Joe Biden having 75, 80% of these ballot dumps coming in these key battleground states that just so happen to be close. It's so crazy.
On the other hand, Joe, we knew all along, and we had the count ahead of the election of the 100 million votes cast before Election Day by mail-in or advance voting, that like 60-some, close to 68% of them were Democratic. So you say predictable. Wasn't it also predictable in a fair sense that we'd be getting big Democratic surges beyond when the polls closed, because that's when they'd start counting the early votes?
So let's look at this. Before, when they were pushing in their mail-in balloting, it was, you can go back, I've read several of the articles, and I would recommend our listeners and viewers do that. Go back and read what they were saying about mail-in balloting. And I'm talking in April. They were saying it's not going to make a significant difference. It's not going to be that substantial. This is just Trump talking points, because Trump was saying this is going to open the doors to mail-in fraud. So what did they have to do to really make this mail-in voting secure? They had to push their coronavirus hoax. And I'm using the word hoax. The coronavirus itself wasn't a hoax. The lockdowns, the social curbs, the over-the-top response was a hoax. And now we know why that hoax happened. So they could have their mail-in balloting. The mail-in balloting itself isn't a fraud. It makes the Democratic fraud easier. And that is what we're seeing. I would agree that Democrats may have some advantage. But when you have dumps where Joe Biden's getting 20,000 votes and Trump is getting like none in Wisconsin, I mean, that doesn't happen. And it happened at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 in the morning. They knew the lead Trump had. Well, isn't that a lot easier to wipe out the lead when you know how many votes exactly you need to get to do it? This is so suspicious. This is so wrong. And it stinks to high heaven. It really does.
Joe, given that many of these states, most of them, perhaps all of them, will segregate the votes that came in by mail and that came in early, but particularly by mail. We'll get percentages, won't we, on what percent went to Biden and what percent went to Trump. And if that is above 55, 60%, maybe 65 tops, will that by itself be a basis for a challenge, do you think? Just publicizing that?
That is going to be a huge red flag, and we're going to see those red flags flying everywhere. You tell me, how does a 300,000 vote advantage in Michigan get wiped away in a couple of hours? I don't, if you're just whatever you're doing with these batches of votes, how were you able to arrange it so it would happen like that? Right. I mean, this is mathematically impossible. It can't happen. I wrote a late article. I went to bed around 4 a.m. Trump was up 120,000 votes in Wisconsin with 90% of the vote in. That's why I saw 88, 89%. I woke up 3 hours later. He's down 20,000 votes. It's 140,000 vote change, and 95% of the vote is in. So 5-6% more of it came in. You literally every vote, pretty much, plus some others, over 100% would have had to have gone to Joe Biden for that to happen. It doesn't make sense at any level. I think this is going to be easily exposed if our court systems work, if our legal system works, if we're truly not a South American banana republic. And, based on what I've seen in 2020, we may be. But if we're not, I think Trump is not going to have a difficulty exposing a lot of this fraud. I don't care what they say about mail-in balloting being harder to prove. This was not really that well done, is how I see it.
Well, we got a lot ahead on that count, but it does look like Republicans will continue to control the Senate, barely, and Democrats will still control the House, but they lost 5 seats when they were expected to pick up as many as 20. What were the voters saying with their congressional preferences, do you think?
And this will not be given the credit it's due. I think this is President Trump helping the Republicans in ways that the Republican establishment will never acknowledge. 2018, Trump isn't on the ballot. They lose the House and struggle with the Senate. 2020, Trump's on the ballot. I think you can make a very strong argument that is why they gained in the House. And especially, I'm going to say President Trump is the reason they kept the Senate. Look at some of the awful candidates that ran as Republican senators this year. McSally in Arizona, I've written this. She's one of the worst candidates I've ever seen in my life. She just is not a good campaigner. Everybody says it. She was a disaster. I would actually say she probably cost Trump votes in Arizona, people who didn't love Trump, but would have gone out for a good Republican Senate candidate. But we're talking about Congress here, so let's focus on that. So we lose that. The Republicans lose that seat because they insisted on trying to shove McSally down the throats of Arizonans. Then you go to Georgia, and I know Kelly Loeffler ended up getting through, but she was a weak candidate too. And I would say if Donald Trump isn't on the ticket, excellent chance Tom Tillis loses, who is a GOP establishment Chamber of Commerce guy. He loses, Republicans lose the Senate. Donald Trump very well could be and I think he is the reason Republicans still hold the Senate today.
No matter the final certified outcome of this presidential election, the populist movement ignited by Trump looks like it's not going away anytime soon. What would you see as the future of that movement if Donald Trump is no longer president? Will it survive? Will it thrive? Can it thrive with the continuing hatred of Trump's supporters by establishment and progressive forces?
Well, I think what this big, massive voting fraud reveals, again, is the establishment side is not popular. We said this all along. Joe Biden, historically awful candidate. I don't care how many votes they're saying he's going to get. I stand by that. He ran an atrocious campaign. He had no excitability factor, nothing. It just so happens our country is so divided, as you said. You could literally run a head of cabbage with a blue sticker on it and you as a Democrat, and you will win the Northeast corridor and in the West Coast. So we know this. How do Democrats win presidential elections? They got to get a couple more states in that Rust Belt, that working class Rust Belt. So for Republicans to be, establishment Republicans say, oh, Donald Trump is gone, our problems are solved. You are not going to win elections in that Rust Belt. Trump proved the formula for Republicans winning presidential elections. And that formula was proven again in this election. You take care of your Republican states, the heartland. Look how he performed in Florida and Texas that some people were worried about. He dominated there. And then you win those working class, blue collar, Rust Belt states. He won them on election night. I maintain he won them. He won Pennsylvania. He won Michigan. He very likely won Wisconsin without this massive voter fraud. So if Republicans want to win elections, you cannot move away from this America First blue collar labor movement that Donald Trump has crafted for this party. It's not going away whether Republicans abandon it or not. It is a force, no matter what happens with these results, for years to come.
What an elegant recitation of the significance of the Trump movement, whether he's president or not. I think it's pretty clear he's going to continue to be a dominating force in American politics, even if he's on the outside rather than the inside. Joe,
might
thanks.
Make him stronger.
He might be. And we'll discuss that in a future show, because a Donald Trump throwing bombs from the outside after he's done it from the inside could be an entirely different force of nature. But thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty.
Today.
All the time and everywhere.
With LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis.
You're looking at people just rising up.
Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts. And dozens of insightful original articles. And now, you can keep your kids ahead of the curve with LNGenZ.com. LN Gen Z brings a free-thinking education right into your home for students of every grade level with articles, videos, worksheets, and ready-to-go curricula. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. Liberty Nation and LNGenZ.com.